The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday, June 1st. I hope everybody is having a great beginning to the week. And yeah, we can move on. All right. Thomas says you and Nikos needed a music history geek to join you yesterday. Yes, probably, but yes. All right. Let's jump in because we have a lot to talk about today. It's a full show. So I was going to do two shows today. I was going to do a new show, quick news show earlier, and then do a full show on nuclear power. The nuclear power show is being sponsored by Richard. He paid $1,000 for it. So you too can sponsor a show on any topic you want for $1,000. So I'm going to dedicate a solid hour at least to the nuclear power topic. So that is going to come after the news. So we're going to go well into the third hour today. So I'm asking you to consider to be generous, given that it's going to be 3 hours and we've got a $250 an hour kind of minimum to raise. So please consider that. But yes, so we're gonna go through some news. And then we're going to go into the nuclear stuff, and we're going to cover that. I should have brought Alex Epstein for that. That is true. Alex is hard to get these days and hard to reach, but he's a busy guy. But yes, been trying to contact him to come on the show, but while he responds, we haven't been able to make it possible. Anyway. I think we've got, I've done my research. I've done a lot of my research based on Alex's stuff. So I think you're going to get a Alex-like with some Yaron flair response to the nuclear issues. So I hope you will not be disappointed. All right, so let's jump in with the news. And as always, these days, the top of the news is Iran. It's just the roller coaster continues, the zigzagging, the pathetic, defeatist attitude of Donald Trump just continues to be in display. Anyway, you woke up this morning, and this morning the headlines basically were Iran walking away from negotiations. Iran has decided it's not going to negotiate anymore. It's not returning emails. It's not returning texts. It's done with negotiating. And the Pakistanis, forget about it. And the Qataris forget about it. Iran doesn't want to negotiate. And I was like, yes, I knew the Iranians would save us in the end. But never underestimate Donald Trump's willingness to grovel and to basically, succumb to any of the Iranian demands. Donald Trump wants a deal. He's desperate for a deal. He doesn't want one. He's desperate for it. He's got a World Cup that starts, Nico said, in 9 days from now. Right? He doesn't want to be at war with a World Cup happening. He's got the courts all over him. He's got internal challenges and everything. He doesn't need a war to be a distraction from all that. Right now, he needs to focus. He's got an election. And the election is coming up fast. We're already in June 1st today. So we're talking about 5 months to an election. He's panicking. He could lose the Senate. The numbers look horrific. So the Republicans could lose both the House and the Senate. And then he's in trouble for the next 2 years. He might as well resign because he'll get nothing done, right? So Trump needs a deal. But he can't make the deal completely surrender. He has to have eke out some kind of legitimacy for it. So anyway, it turns out the Iranians were really, really, really upset. They were upset, the Iranians. They were upset. And we don't want the Iranians upset, right? The Iranians were upset because Israel is advancing in southern Lebanon. They crossed the Litani River, ground forces crossed the Litani River, took the Beaufort Castle, which is a strategic point in southern Lebanon, kind of between the Israeli border and Beirut. It's a high peak, and it is an ancient fortress, and it's an ancient fortress for a reason, because it's a high peak and it gives you strategic control over the landscape. And Israel conquered the Beaufort and has been pounding Hezbollah, including bombing in Beirut. And like the Iranians said, we're not doing a deal unless Israel has a ceasefire in Lebanon. That is a precondition. We're not even going to talk to you unless there is a ceasefire in Lebanon. So Iran is insisted on Israel seeking a ceasefire before anything is agreed for. Now, of course, Iran is the one that pokes Hezbollah constantly to attack Israel, to give it an excuse not to keep negotiating with Trump, so he can make Trump look like an idiot. So Israel responds, and Iran said, "Oh, I'm upset because Israel responded," and then Trump has to call Netanyahu and yell at him. I mean, Trump is so desperate for a deal before the world economy drops off a cliff. Oil prices in the United States head towards $8 a gallon. And at this point, the Iranians are running rings around Trump, running rings around him. It's the most embarrassing display of so-called negotiation I have ever seen. The Iranians have a strategy. They're going to keep haranguing. They're going to keep insisting on everything that they want. They want the money. They don't want to commit on nuclear. They want to control Hormuz Straits, and they'll just keep insisting on that, They're suffering because they're poor and no money's coming in, and they can't sell oil. Although who knows what's going on in that eastern border they have with Pakistan and Afghanistan, and a road to China, and who knows what's going on in the Crimean, with their road to Tajikistan and boats going to Russia. So who knows what's coming in and out through there. But the reality is Iran doesn't seem like it's in a hurry. Everybody said, 3 weeks and they'll have to cap their wells. Well, it turns out they don't. For some reason, they're able to pump that oil and it's going somewhere. So all the estimates were wrong about Iran's desperation. Iran can afford to stay weak, to stay poor. It can afford to starve its own people. Water supplies in Iran are running low. Who cares? So people will die. They don't care. Trump cares. Trump cares. Trump wants to be loved. The Iranian regime does not care about love. Trump wants to be loved. He's a narcissist. So they have a strategy, which is just pound away at the things that they want. Pound and pound and pound. And when they want more time, have Hezbollah attack Israel, force Israel to attack Hezbollah, and then say, whoops, can't negotiate because they broke the ceasefire. Trump has no strategy. Nothing. So what did Trump do today? When it was announced that Iranian withdrew, Trump said, I don't care. I don't care if they withdraw. I don't care about that. That's what he said publicly. But in the background, he called up Netanyahu. Desperate. He's desperate. Right? And he says, so this is what he said this afternoon. He said, so I spoke with Hezbollah. He didn't. He spoke with the people in Lebanon. I spoke with Hezbollah and I said, no shooting. And I talked to Bibi and said, no shooting. And they both stopped shooting each other. So he's got a ceasefire. But what really happened is he called Netanyahu and he yelled at him and he begged him and he demanded that Israel stop shooting. Now, Netanyahu says the opposite. Right? Netanyahu says, here's Netanyahu. Here's a tweet from him. When was this tweet? It was, today at 3:32, so about 3 hours ago. Tonight, I spoke with President Trump and told him that if Hezbollah does not cease attacking our cities and citizens, Israel will attack terror targets in Beirut. This stance of ours remains unchanged. In parallel, the IDF will continue to operate as planned in southern Lebanon. So Netanyahu, who's facing an election, is taking a stance publicly. I haven't agreed to a ceasefire and Hezbollah needs to stop. If it stops, okay, maybe we'll stop bombing Beirut, but we're not going to stop the operation in southern Lebanon. And Trump called the Lebanese government, and the Lebanese government said, yeah, we'll tell Hezbollah to stop, as if they have any power over the Hezbollah. I mean, the only people that have power of Hezbollah are the Iranians, and the Iranians use Hezbollah for whenever they need an excuse to break off negotiations with Trump. When Trump earlier today was asked about the negotiations being over, this is what he said to a reporter in CNBC. I don't care if they're over. Honestly, I really don't care. I couldn't care less if they're over. They're over. If they're not, I think they took too much time. Frankly, I thought they started to get very boring. The negotiations got boring. This is the President of the United States. But then, again, he then said, no, they're back and we're going to get a deal. And within a week, we're going to have a deal. And deal's within a week. And after yelling at Bibi and forcing both Bibi and the Lebanese government, I guess, into a ceasefire, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen? In the meantime, it's turned out that the United States Navy has quietly been guiding approximately, over the last 3 weeks, has been guiding approximately 70 commercial vessels in and out of the Straits of Hormuz. According to the report, most of the vessels transited with their transponders off to avoid being targeted by Iranian fires, by the Iranians, and also they transited very close to Oman, away from routes designated by Iran's Persian Gulf Authority. And this kind of explains why there's been some shooting over there. The U.S. has downed some of the speedboats. They've taken out some radars. They've done a few things to kind of clear out the Straits of Hormuz. This is what they could do at scale and open up the Straits completely. I've always said the U.S. Navy is completely 100% capable of opening up the Straits of Hormuz. It's a question of, will Trump let them? Will Trump give them an authority? Now, remember, 70 boats, traffic in and out was at 130, 100 to 150 boats a day. So 70 in 3 weeks is pretty pathetic. Is that 3 to 4 boats a day? Yep. All right, let's see. So that was Iran, Trump. I feel kind of terrible about spending time on it because nothing really changes. But I don't know where all the Trump fans are. They're not on the chat anymore. They don't listen to the show live anymore, or at least don't participate. And the obnoxious ones I blocked. But if there's still Trump fans out there, explain this to me. I'm curious if anybody can give he's been named by some people within the objectivist world as the greatest president ever. I mean, just look at how he behaves with Iran, and you tell me this is how a decent, never mind good president behaves. All right, shifting from Donald Trump to Bernie Sanders. This is perfect. Bernie is going to introduce a bill to Congress to have the government take a 50% ownership stake in the country's biggest AI companies. The American AI Sovereign Wealth Fund Act would have the government tax AI companies and take 50% of the stock and put it under the public control. Now, I assume that is because it would give the government then the ability to control the agenda of the AI companies. I mean, instead of regulating, they'll just own them. And the government will also benefit if the AI stocks go through the roof, although with government control, it is unlikely that that will actually happen, right? Here's from Bernie Sanders himself. This legislation will give the public a direct ownership stake in the largest AI companies in our country. How? It would create a sovereign wealth fund through a one-time 50% tax. 50% tax. 50. Not on the profits of OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI, and other companies, but paid with something far more valuable than that, the stock. So the companies would just have to hand over the stock. Just hand it over. If passed, this legislation would do two crucial things. First, it would give the public a direct role in determining the future of this technology. No longer would the future of AI and the transformation of human life that it will bring be dictated by a handful of big tech oligarchs. That's right. I mean, the transformation that electricity and the telephone and air flight and the automobile. I mean, that was so badly handled by the big, well, by the robber barons, that we don't want that to happen again. We need to make sure that we have the government involved. No longer will the future of AI and the transformation of human life that it brings be dictated by a handful of big tech oligarchs. That is a sentence for the ages. The federal government will have the power through its voting shares and an equal representation on each company's board to block decisions that hurt our citizens and push for policies that help them. Second, this legislation will guarantee that the trillions of dollars potentially generated by AI are used to improve the lives of all of us, not simply to make the richest people in the world even richer. If the big AI companies continue to grow as rapidly as many analysts expect, they don't expect government ownership though, then the value of the sovereign wealth fund will grow as well, and the benefits to all American people will grow along with it. Anyway, that's Bernie Sanders. Now, I'd say this is crazy, and Bernie is a crazy socialist, and this is horrific and horrible. But the reality is that the Trump administration is not quite ready to take 50%, but it's taking ownership stake in companies left and right, dozens. It all started with a golden share in U.S. Steel, and then Intel, and then other, rare earth materials and quantum computing. And would anybody be surprised if Trump organized a somehow government stake in AI companies? Now, granted, Trump is not taking 50%. He's only taking like 10 or something like that. But, socialism is socialism. The government owning the means of production. It's true that Bernie is more committed a socialist than Donald Trump. But this is just on a spectrum. This is not absolute. This is just, Trump is at 10+%, Bernie's at 50. Maybe they can compromise on 25. This is, and Trump was considering signing an executive order, which luckily he did not, creating a government entity that would control the models. So he doesn't need ownership in order to control. So, we're getting to the point again where the difference between the left and the right is not one stands for capitalism and therefore for no government ownership of business, and the other stands for ownership of business. The only difference now between left and right is the percentage ownership that they take in American businesses. Pretty pathetic, really. All right, a story out of the UK. We talked a lot about the lack of free speech in the UK and generally in Europe, and just the growing the growth in that aspect. Well, here's the story. The British Museum, and I'm reading from the Wall Street Journal, British Museum postponed a public lecture scheduled for Wednesday, this is last week, on the Iron Age Kingdom of Israel. Iron Age. It's like 3,000 years ago, right? In Iron Age, kingdoms of Israel and Judea. Less than 24 hours before it was due to start. I mean, this is a pretty geeky lecture, right? Iron Age. The reason, the museum said, was security concerns. A significant proportion of the registered attendees were individuals intending to deliberately disrupt the event. God forbid you talk about Israel, ancient or modern, doesn't matter. The lecture, to be given by Paul Collins, who runs the museum's Middle East department, was planned as a highlight of Britain's first ever Jewish Culture Month. So you can't talk about Israel in a public event in Britain anymore, because instead of, I remember I once gave a talk at University of Irvine, and it was clear it was going to be disruptive, and a bunch of people who were signed up seemed like they were going to be disrupt the event and maybe even become violent. And what happened was, the Irvine police, the campus police at UC Irvine, let the Irvine police, UC Irvine is in Irvine, know, and basically Irvine police showed up, and they basically had, they had 20 cops, 30 cops, and yes, the disruption happened, and they were all arrested, and that was it, and it ended, and I continued the talk. Same thing happened in University of Texas in Austin. I gave a talk about Israel, was it 2.5 years ago, and the campus police showed up in mass, and the result was that, yes, people disrupted, but they were taken out, and some of them were arrested. One of them suing the police, and is still it's still facing litigation, but it was dealt with, and the talk went on. So in England, they don't do that. No, if somebody threatens to disrupt, they just cancel the event. You don't have free speech in England. You have free speech only if nobody threatens to disrupt. The whole point of the police, the whole point of the government, is to protect you from those who would violate your freedoms, and in this case, your freedom of speech. The job of government is not to decide whether your speech is good or bad. The job of the government is to protect you from those who would stop you from speaking. Yeah. I mean, the British Museum was built on the idea of the Enlightenment's faith in reason. Faith in reason doesn't go right. That's the Wall Street Journal speaking. And it's a monument to liberal and democratic culture. Yet, it's surrendering in the face of barbarism. The would-be protesters weren't rogue archaeologists looking to debate the dating of coins and jewelry. They laid an ambush as part of a continuing campaign to delegitimize the modern state of Israel by denying or suppressing the historical truth the Jewish people are indigenous to the Levant, and that modern Israel stands on the same ground as their sovereign states did in the ancient past. Not that I think that gives them legitimacy to anything. So it really is stunning. Here's another one. I mean, in the seaside town of Bournemouth, a exhibit on the local Jewish community's history, funded by the National Heritage Lottery Fund, was postponed, apparently permanently. How do you postpone something permanently? After a Jewish man was shot with an air rifle and a rabbi's home was vandalized. At last summer's Edinburgh Festival, which also received state funding, 2 Jewish comedians had their shows canceled after staff raised safety concerns. Oh my God. The inaugural Jewish Culture Month was launched to counter this kind of criminal intimidation and institutional weakness. The campaign to globalize the Intifada poses a problem to the very foundations of free speech. And unless the police and unless the government is willing to stand up against them, then free speech loses all meaning. It fades. It fades. Freedom generally fades when the threat of violence is succumbed to. It's just given into. All right. Okay, the rest of the news items are all good news. I have good news for you today. Today, the Human Achievement section includes a bunch of different things and some really good news that's, I guess, human achievement as well. So in 2015, Baltimore arrests, and were way down. Crime was way up, and Baltimore became one of the highest murder places in the country. But around 2022, crime in Baltimore, most especially murders, began to fall. This is from an article about this. In April, Baltimore had 4 homicides, the lowest total of any single month since at least 1970. Remember, Baltimore is the city in which The Wire takes place. So far this year, there were 38, compared with 51 in the same period last year. At the current rate, Baltimore will end 2026 with fewer than 100 homicides. There were 323 just 4 years ago. Wow, that's a drop of 66%, almost 70%. How did we get from a city in which the question was, how high can crime rise, to one where the question is, how low can it go? Now, the answer might be linked to the nationwide decline in murder, spurred by restoration of policing as excesses of George Floyd years receded. But that raises a question of what cities across the country are actually doing right. So what's caused this decline? Now, we're not completely sure. It really is, a hard to tell on a national scale. But at least one person, Charles Fain Lehman, has a story in the Free Press, Barry Weiss's publication, where he is arguing that it basically boils down to what's called carrots, sticks, and the non-random nature of murder. So think about for example, carrots and sticks, I think, are relatively easy to understand. Increase police, be tougher on sentencing, and be more engaged in the communities with carrots. But think about the fact that murder is not random. A significant subset of murders are highly predictable. For example, a gang member gets gunned down today. Next week, you can expect retaliation. Moreover, you know who is going to do the murder even more than you know who is going to be murdered. Namely, a close associate, a fellow gang or family member of the guy who got murdered will be the one doing the killing. Right? It's not hard. So with this in mind, Baltimore, under a new mayor and tough-on-crime prosecutor, began to intervene in murder cycles before it happened. They focused on deterrence programs based on what's called the Boston's Operation Ceasefire. You can look that up at what that is. The approach involves a detailed investigation of every shooting that happens in the city. Every week, the Baltimore Police Department and its partners review the city's incidents for every shooting, and they prescribe reaching out to known associates of the victim. At one recent coordinated meeting, about 20 people gathered around a table of a conference room at Baltimore's Doxa Ministries Church Without Walls, under the direction of Reginald William from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. They talked through 2 new referrals associated with the victim of a recent shooting. One had a long criminal history and was on house arrest. Another, barely an adult, was himself a victim a few years earlier. Both men will have their doors knocked on by several of the meeting's attendees. They will be offered services, job training, tattoo removal, relocation, whatever they need to get out of the life. But they will also get a clear message, delivered verbally and in the form of a letter from Mayor Scott. Baltimore is watching them and will come after them. So tough on crime. Do the work, the homework. Figure out who the bad guys are. You know, most crime is done by a very, very, very small number of people. Follow through. Yeah, offer people ways out, but make clear what the alternative is. So, you know, we can delve in a future show, delve into this process even more and see how applicable it is, you know, across the United States. But, you know, this is really good news. Crime going down, particularly murder, going down is, without a doubt, good news. So there's a story in the Free Press. Why did the murders stop in Baltimore? 28th of May. Check it out. It's good. It's interesting. It's also interesting, right? How this works, why it works, where it works. And you know, a lot of the increase in crime in the late 20-teens and then certainly during COVID, after George Floyd, is police department getting away from this kind of stuff, getting away from what's called the broken window, getting away from neighborhood policing, not putting enough cops on the street, getting away from being tough, getting away from follow through, and getting away from doing the work, doing the actual work. And, you know, so it looks like we know how to get rid of, in particular, murder. We just need to do it. Just do it. All right, here's a great story. I mean, I've been waiting for this story. All right, so Google, you know Google, the search, Google. Google is planning to release 32 million mosquitoes across Florida and California. All right, that, I had to take a step back. What the F? Why is Google releasing mosquitoes? It turns out Google has a biotech company that this is what it does. The company has asked the EPA for permission to proceed, with the public given until June 5th to respond. The mosquitoes are infected with Wolbachia bacteria, which stops them from reproducing and slowly collapses the wild population from within. Google's previous debug project trial in California's Central Valley nearly eliminated mosquitoes from 3 test sites entirely. A separate trial in Singapore cut dengue fever. Dengue fever is brutal. We have it here in Puerto Rico. It cut dengue by 70% within 12 months. Google has now released over 1 billion mosquitoes across 4 continents. This new proposal is the largest deployment in U.S. history. Right? I mean, 32 million sounds like some kind of biblical swarm. But remember, here's some important facts, because you're thinking, 32 million, they're all going to bite me. No, these are all males. Male mosquitoes don't bite. The bite, the disease, are all the females. So releasing 32 million mosquitoes does not increase biting. What actually happens is that, you know, this is, by the way, Alphabet's life science arm, Verily. What actually happens is they are targeting one species, Aedes aegypti. It's a sliver of the total mosquito population, but it carries dengue, Zika, yellow fever, and chikungunya. So it carries all the diseases. And they sicken hundreds of millions of people a year around the world. This mosquito, this type of mosquito, is the deadliest animal on Earth. deadlier than human beings. And is the one, so what do they do here? They don't genetically modify. They infect the male with this bacteria. And it's a bacteria that's already living in more than half of all insect species. The bacteria in the male, when the male mates with a female in the wild, the bacteria infects the female, and her eggs never hatch. And because the eggs never hatch, the population collapses from inside. Now, this is perfect. This is a beautiful technique. And I hope they come to Puerto Rico and get rid of the mosquitoes here. I mean, mosquitoes are bad enough, but if they carry diseases, that's awful. So get rid of those mosquitoes. It would be great just to get rid of mosquitoes. I'm not a fan of mosquitoes more broadly, but certainly not the ones that are like this. Yeah, if we can get rid of them, all the power to them. All right, so that's just a little tech, human ingenuity, human achievement, ridding us of a pest, the number one killer of human beings. You wouldn't have guessed, mosquitoes. Right? And no genetic engineering, which people freak out about. I'm all for genetic engineering, but people freak out about that. So it's just using a bacteria, exists in nature already, just applying it to mosquitoes. Right? It's pretty amazing. This is coming from Google, your friendly pest removal service, and search engine, and AI engine, and advertising engine, and who knows what else. Oh, they own Waymo, right? They autonomous car, autonomous taxi. I mean, just Google. All right, more on the good news. New Orleans. New Orleans is where OCON is going to happen this year, so pay attention. New Orleans used to have one of the worst educational systems in America. I mean, before Hurricane Katrina, the system was a disaster. Over 60% of New Orleans public schools were rated as failing. Kids' attendance was chaotic. Dangerous schools were constant disruptions, and had the constant disruptions, and learning was impossible. It was just a complete disaster and a mess. What happened after Katrina is complete transformation. The state took over the worst schools, and then they converted the entire district. To charter schools. In other words, schools with independence, or at least some independence. Now, granted, this is still state-run. This is still the government. I get it. Don't complain to me. This is not pure private. I know, but it's an improvement. Kids are getting an education. They converted the entire district to charter schools. They eliminated neighborhood attendance zones and gave families real school choice. Thousands of underperforming teachers and staff were fired. Whoa! Corruption and low standards were confronted directly. It was radical. Oh, I mean, not as radical as I would want, but radical. And it worked. Right now, in New Orleans, they have 0 failing schools. Remember, it was 60%. 92% of schools now rated A or B. The district's earned its highest ever grade as a district, a B. And the gains survived the pandemic, and they keep climbing. There's competition between the charter schools, and parents can send their kids to any school. And there is real change. Kids are getting an education. It's not perfect. Far from perfect. Perfect would be private. I'll take kids getting a better education than getting a worse education. Now, what drove the turnaround? Autonomy for schools to innovate, the charter network. Accountability. Bad charter schools can be closed quickly. Family choice instead of forced neighborhood attendance, so parents can move their kids out of failing schools into good schools. More instruction time. 16 extra days of reading and 6 extra days of math per year. Sustained focus on results over bureaucracy and excuses. So again, I'm sure it's far from ideal. But hey, you take one of the worst school districts in the country and turn it around, you get thumbs up for me. If you provide schools with autonomy, accountability, and competition, and you give parents choice, things get better. You know how things get even better? Is you completely privatize them. But that's too radical for the world right now. I'll advocate for it. You'll advocate for it. But in the meantime, this is better than nothing. It's better than failure. All right. Let's see. What do I have here? Yeah. So last story. This is really a story that we've been talking about. We talked about all last week. But Derek Thompson has a tweet that I think captures kind of the atmosphere. So there was a conference over the weekend. It was the big oncology conference. This is the big cancer conference. Cancer doctors, cancer researchers, they get together. And Derek Thompson, who writes a lot about progress, summed it up as, this has quietly been a miracle month in medicine. In the last 5 weeks, we've got news on Retatitude, Tide, the triple agnostic GLP-1 from Lilly, basically melting fat and body-wide inflammation at record levels. RevMed's new pancreatic cancer drug showing unprecedented abilities to extend life. Small trial of a one-and-done PCSK9 gene editing therapy. We've talked about all of these for slashing LDL cholesterol. Mayo Clinic's AI-assisted radiology showing vastly improved cancer detection. And a new therapy for metastatic solid tumors. He writes, this stuff at varying levels of evidence. The GLP-1 is 100% on its way. Other stuff needs more clinical trial data. But put it together, and we're maybe on the verge of majorly reducing the mortality of heart disease and cancer, the two leading causes of death in America. This is another tweet I saw today. It shows a video from this oncology conference that happened this weekend. And it's of the doctors in this session giving the presenter a standing ovation. And this is a standing ovation for, that is the sound of a standing ovation. This is a standing ovation for Draxon Recib. Over 40,000 oncologists, entrepreneurs, investors, and patient advocates together celebrating RevMed's breakthrough in the fight against pancreatic cancer. I mean, somebody wrote, I've never been at a medical conference where the results are being greeted with a standing ovation. Tremendous breakthrough in pancreatic cancer treatment. Through science, hard work, rigorous research, clinical trials, science, not quack pseudoscience of social media, real science, real evidence, real trials, not give everybody ivermectin and forget about it, right? This is the real stuff. Progress is really, really being made. So, yeah. Now, somebody wrote, and this will be the last comment I'll make, and then we'll move to nuclear. Somebody wrote, oh, if you're under 50, you're likely to live to be 150. Just stay healthy. Just don't get really sick. And Derek Thompson wrote a post in response to that, which I thought was very good. And I'll just read you this because it's really good. I think we're on the verge of a golden age in cardiometabolic health, thanks GLP-1s, and oncology, CRT, dexorasib, checkpoint inhibitors, and don't forget the mRNA vaccines for cancer. But let's be real about what average lifespans in the hundreds would require, right? So for all of you who are getting real excited about living to be 150, the oldest documented person died 29 years ago. Jean Calment, at 122 years old. In 30 years, with all the advances in medicine, nobody else has even gotten to 120. A life expectancy of 110 would require about 25% of women to live longer than Clement, and about 6% of women to live past 150. 3 decades older than the record. This isn't even close to happening yet. Not even close. The good news is we're getting better and better at eliminating death before 80. We're not yet getting any better at extending life beyond 110. Doing so will probably require advances that have nothing to do with GLP-1s and cancer therapies. You basically need to build new bodies for humans, or rejuvenate the cells that we have right now. But, so we're less likely to die before 80, which means we're more likely to live to be 90 and 100, but almost nobody lives to be over 110. And the biology of that is probably not changing. People who die at 110 don't typically die of, the body's they're dying of bodily failure, not of typical heart disease or typical cancer. So we need more. But still, super exciting, really, really cool work. I'm excited about being able to keep you updated about all these innovations and good work, and all the great doctors and healthcare professionals and scientists that are out there, doing the work to make this happen. This doesn't just happen. Science just doesn't advance. It advances because these people, do amazing work. And one of the great evils of the post-COVID era is how so many people have turned against doctors, against science, against scientists, in the name of, quackery. All right. Proto says, in the Bible, Adam lived to 930 and Methuselah lived a record 969. Well, God, we know that everything written in the Bible is absolutely true. Absolutely, without question, true. Even the super, unbelievably religious Jews don't believe that. They think that a year back then meant a little different than a year today. Yeah. Anyway, but that's, the sun stopped because it circles the earth. The sun stopped to allow Joshua to finish up the battle and win it in the Bible as well. So stopping the sun is also possible. And by the way, the sun goes around the earth in the Bible. There you go. All right, that, my friends, is the news for this Monday, June 1st. A lot of good news. So I hope you appreciate that. All right. So the final segment, and I've got a lot to say about this, so this will be a while. This is a segment that was sponsored by Richard. So thank you, Richard. I know Richard is here because he's already done a super chat question on top of the sponsorship. Let me remind you guys that we have goals, $250 being an hour being the goal. We're almost at the end of the first hour, and we're about $70 short of our first hour goal. Let's please try to keep up. You can ask questions on anything, nuclear or anything else, or the news or anything. And, ideally, questions $20 and $50, a bunch of $20 are great because we can really make progress in attaining our goal that way. So please consider making those contributions. I know that, Richard sponsored the show, but still have to fund the actual time of the show. So keep the questions coming. We've done okay, but we still are short $70, and we've got 9 minutes to get to $70. You can also do a sticker. Don't have to ask a question, and that way you don't have to worry about a question, but you can still show your support for the show and trade value for value, me delivering, you appreciating with a check. All right, so today we're going to talk about nuclear energy. And we're not going to just talk about it as an energy issue, because it's not primarily an energy issue. It's a philosophical issue, a moral issue, a political issue. It's an issue about what kind of world we want to live in. It's an issue about kind of the civilization and whether it can continue. It's not just should we build more nuclear power plants, but what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world of abundance, of industry, technology, growth, confidence, and a confidence in the future? Or do we want to live in a world of fear, a world of rationing, of permission, of bureaucratic paralysis, and filled with environmental guilt? And just to be clear, I mean, nuclear energy is one of mankind's greatest achievements. It is the human mind discovering the power inside matter and turning that power into electricity, heat, industry, medicine, comfort, life. We, and I'm taking collective credit, I guess, but we, human beings, a human being, a set of human beings, figured out how to split the atom. That is amazing. We understand the structure of nature to such a profound level that we can use that knowledge to transform human life. It is a beautiful, amazing, magnificent thing. And yet in America today, nuclear power is being treated not as an achievement to be celebrated, but a danger to contain, a sin to apologize for, a threat to be regulated into near oblivion, near impossibility. So today we're going to talk about the past, the present, the future of nuclear energy and how America pioneered it, crippled it, and what it's going to take in order to liberate it. To be clear, nuclear energy didn't fail. America failed nuclear energy. And it's America, not just America. It's Germany, it's the UK, but it's America. We didn't lose nuclear because of the physics failed. We did not lose nuclear because engineering failed. We did not lose nuclear because the technology could not work, or because it was not safe, or because we didn't know what to do with the material, the leftover material. None of that is true. We lost nuclear because we buried it under fear, pseudoscience, environmentalism, litigation, regulatory uncertainty, and, in a sense, worst of all, a permission-based view of human life. You need permission to innovate, to grow, to succeed. We turned the builder into a suspect. We turned the engineer into a defendant. Energy into something morally suspicious because it's nuclear. Fear came to dominate the entire discussion and debate. So let's look at what has happened. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, nuclear energy is a phenomenon source of energy, and energy is, of course, necessary for human life and for human progress and for economic success and for nuclear is dense. A tiny amount of fuel produces enormous amounts of electricity. It's reliable. It runs day and night. Think of that. Don't require the sun to shine or the wind to blow. It's scalable. It can power cities, factories, data centers, advanced industries. It has a small physical footprint relative to the energy it produces. If your standard is human flourishing, nuclear energy is an obvious good. But that's the key. If your standard is human flourishing. On the other hand, if your standard is untouched nature, if your standard is minimizing human impact, if your standard is sacrifice, if your standard is fear, then nuclear becomes threatening precisely because it works. It makes abundance possible. It makes industrial civilization cleaner, more powerful, and more resilient. I mean, nuclear really does expose the environmentalist movement for what it really is. For decades, environmentalists have told us that the carbon emissions are an existential crisis. Not true, but okay. If that is what you believe, nuclear should be your favorite energy source. Reliable, scalable, and super low in carbon. But most environmentalists oppose it anyway. They oppose it anyway. Why? Because for them, the real goal is not clean abundance. They hate abundance. The real goal is less human impact, less energy, less industry, less growth, less human transformation of nature, which is human transformation of nature is the way human beings survive. So it's less human life. Nuclear energy is hated by environmentalists not because it fails, but because it succeeds. It offers mankind abundance with almost no with no pollution. It offers us abundance, a path to abundance, a path to energy abundance, which means industrial and wealth abundance. So let's look at what happened. Again, this is a quick overview in a sense. You can really dig really deep here. So let's look at the past. America was once the leader in nuclear power. We pioneered commercial nuclear energy. We had the technology, we had the engineers, we had the utilities, the industrial base, and we had the confidence to build. In the 1960s and 1970s, early 1970s, nuclear power was not viewed as some impossible, exotic, unfinanceable technology. It was viewed as the future of energy, the future of electricity. Utilities ordered hundreds of reactors. Serious projections imagine hundreds of gigawatts of nuclear capacity, even more than 1,000 gigawatts by the year 2000. And it was not a fantasy in the way people might think today. It was an exploration. It was extrapolation from what was actually going on, from an actual industrial trend. The industry was learning. Plants were being built. Costs were expected to fall because repetition and expertise and know-how. It's the same logic in every successful industrial technology. Build the first one, then the next, standardize, train workers, build supply chains, preserve experienced construction teams, improve methods, repeat, and the design. Move down the learning curve. By the way, this is how China does it. If somebody wants to ask a question about China and nuclear, go ahead. This is how China does it. Exactly this way. Build, train, keep the construction teams, improve methods, repeat. And prices come down. I mean, that's how airplanes became cheaper and safer. It's how cars became cheaper and better. It's how semiconductors advanced. It's how natural gas turbines improved. Every industrial technology matures in this way. You have to do it, experiment, try, in some cases even fail. But learn, develop the expertise. And indeed, nuclear was on that path. In the late 1960s, a nuclear power plant cost roughly $700 per kilowatt of capacity in inflation-adjusted terms. Many of these plants were built in 4 to 5 years. The industry was scaling, and the future was clear in terms of where it was, where people thought it was heading. Now, obviously, not every early nuclear power plant took 3 to 4 years. Some projects were very fast. But the stronger point is the trend. Before the late 1970s regulatory spiral, nuclear construction was far faster, more economically plausible than it became later. Then, in the 1970s, America made a fatal choice. Not one single vote or one dramatic event, but through a series of regulatory decisions that compounded over a decade, America systematically destroyed the economics of nuclear power. By the mid-1970s, nuclear construction had risen to 3,100 per kilowatt. That's more than 4 times. Construction times doubled, then tripled. Costs overran, and that became the norm. By the time the Vogtle Units 3 and 4 came online in Georgia just recently, the cost had reached roughly $8,000 per kilowatt, inflation adjusted. And construction had taken over 14 years, from 4 to 14. Now, the technology did not get worse. The physics didn't change. The engineers did not forget how to build things. What changed was the regulatory environment. And it was not an accident. And what also happened, which is super important, is the learning curve was killed. And this is a real tragedy. When people talk about canceled nuclear plants, they often talk about them as missing electricity. Electricity's not there. And that's true. But each canceled plant was much more than that. Each canceled plant was one missing data point on a learning curve. One missing trained crew. One missing project manager. One missing supplier relationship. One missing construction lesson. One missing design improvement. One missing generation of nuclear competence, knowing how to build these things. The tragedy is not just that America failed to build hundreds of nuclear plants. The tragedy is that America abandoned the learning curve at the moment it was about to compound. Instead of pricing getting lower and getting faster, things got slower and more expensive. Imagine if we had stopped building airplanes in 1935 and then tried to restart the aviation industry in 1975. The first airplanes would be expensive. The workforce would be gone. The supply chain would be gone. The institutional knowledge would be gone. And then critics would say, see, airplanes are too expensive. Technology does not work. So let's put numbers to this. I mean, it's staggering. Today, the US has 94 operating reactors. 94. They produce about 97 gigawatts of nuclear capacity. We have roughly 1/10 of what we were on track to build. The Department of Energy's 1972 most likely projection was 980 gigawatts by the year 2000. We're in 2026. 980, that's 10x the gigawatts 26 years ago. The high case was 1,470 gigawatts. The minimal scenario assumes 785 gigawatts. America hit a peak of 112 reactors in 1990 and then flatlined. We've been roughly 100 gigawatts and a little less for 35 years. Everything after that has been cancellations, retirements, paralysis. The canceled capacity number So remember, 10x 26 years ago. So maybe another 5x since then? I don't know. The cancer capacity number is the one that should haunt everyone. Per Global Energy Monitor, the U.S. canceled 172 gigawatts of nuclear capacity. That nuclear capacity was already built. That's more than all the nuclear power America has ever operated, retired, and planned for the future combined. So this is what canceled, the things that were planned to be built and canceled. We canceled more nuclear energy than we ever built. That's insane. Now, what would the counterfactual America look like? A 2024 Northwestern University study tried to quantify it. If the U.S. had stayed on the pre-Three Mile Island trajectory, it would have avoided roughly 2.3 million premature deaths, 55 tons of CO2 emissions. Now, they probably overestimate the impact, the negative impact of CO2, and 14 trillion in health costs. Right. So, I'm skeptical of those numbers, particularly of the deaths and the health, because they overestimate the impact of CO2, negative impact of CO2. The electricity grid today would be almost carbon-free. We wouldn't be building solar and wind. What for? What for? We'd have industrial scale, reliable baseload power built by engineers who knew what they were doing. France of all places, which did not lose its nerve. You can ask me why later. Again, good super chat question. Gets roughly 70% of its electricity from nuclear. The US gets 19%. That gap between France and America, between 97 gigawatts and 980 gigawatts, is not a technology gap. It's a philosophical gap. It's a policy gap. It's what happens when you let fear, dressed up as regulation, make the decisions engineers should have made. People are poorer. America is poorer. American people are poorer. Because we abandoned nuclear energy. All right, so what made nuclear expensive? How did it become so expensive that today it's almost impossible to build nuclear power plants? It's not profitable. Standard answer is nuclear is technically complex. Well, yeah, it's technically complex, but is that really an explanation? I mean, what isn't technically complex? Airplanes, semiconductors, deep water oil platforms, LNG, fracking, skyscrapers, pipelines, they're all complex. Why did nuclear become uniquely slow, uniquely expensive, uniquely legally paralyzed? Really unique among American industries. The answer is regulation. But not just too many rules. Really, 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 really bad ones. It's the kind of regulatory standards applied to nuclear. The regulatory standards for nuclear are a regime built on fear, on hypothetical risk, and an unlimited burden of proof. Two ideas especially important. They're abbreviated as LNT and ALARA. Let's start with LNT. By the way, a lot of this you could find, a lot of this content you could find in Alex Epstein's congressional testimony on nuclear energy that he did. And if you own Alex AI, you can get a lot of this from Alex AI. LNT stands for linear, no threshold. It's the idea that any, literally any, dose of radiation, no matter how small, carries some risk of harm. There's no threshold below which exposure is treated as safe. This is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's foundational assumption about radiation safety. It holds that there's no safe dose of radiation, no matter how small. Remember, you're constantly getting radiation from your environment everywhere you go. There's no such thing as no radiation. Any radiation exposure, even at levels indistinguishable from the background radiation you absorb by walking outside, is treated as proportionally dangerous to human health. Now, the model was not derived from low-dose experimental data. So there's no experimental data showing that really, really, really low doses of radiation cause health problems. It's extrapolated downward from high-dose exposure studies, specifically the Hiroshima bomb survivor data on the bare mathematical assumption the danger is linear all the way to zero. Bomb survivors exposed to massive acute doses of radiation suffered elevated cancer rates. LNT assumed that if you have the dose, you have the risk. And if you have it again and again until the dose is trivially small, the risk halves and with it all the way to zero exposure. But there was no experimental basis for this assumption at low doses. It's a mathematical convenience dressed up as science. And of course, I'll remind you, this is straight out of the precautionary principle, this idea that if you do something new, you have to prove, the burden on you is to prove that it's 100% safe, that it will cause no damage. That's ridiculous. What do actual radiation health experts think? Only 3% believe LNT is accurate at low doses. Per surveys cited by Alex's congressional testimony, 73% think the evidence is inconclusive at low doses, which is profoundly different than saying all doses are dangerous. The practical result, LNT set the public radiation dose limit at least 50 times stricter than what the science actually justifies. Every system in every nuclear power plant had to be over-engineered to meet a standard that was not grounded in reality. That had nothing to do with the facts, nothing to do with the science. Now, add to LNT, add to that ALARA, ALARA, I guess. Low as reasonably achievable. That's what it stands for. As low as reasonably achievable. ALARA. Sounds reasonable, right? Who could be against keeping radiation exposure low? But the reality is that ALARA functions as a ratchet. There's no clear stopping point. You do not simply meet a rational safety standard and then build. Instead, you're expected to keep reducing exposure further and further as long as someone can argue that another expense is reasonable. More shielding, more paperwork, more design changes, more procedures, more mitigation, more delay, more costs. The standard becomes never stop paying for pseudo-safety. A rational safety standard says identify the actual risk, establish an objective threshold, require objective mitigation, and once the standard is met, production proceeds. The nuclear regulatory standard often says assume harm. This is the precaution principle. Demand proof of no harm. Precautionary principle. Entertain every hypothetical objection. Precautionary principle. And never let the producer say, enough, we are safe, we can build. Now, this is not science. This is just pure fear and antagonism to progress. This is not technology. It's a rejection of an epistemology of building. The current system places the burden of proof on the producer. The business must prove that it does not cause harm, which is impossible. You cannot prove a negative. To every conceivable objection, there's always another what if, another model, another activist, another lawsuit, another agency question, another request for more information. It's an inversion of America. an inversion of what it means to be an American, the American principle. The proper principle in America is the presumption of innocence. You're free to act unless the government can demonstrate that you are violating rights, opposing an objective threat of harm, an objective threat to those rights. But in the modern regulatory state, the producer is presumed guilty. The builder must beg for permission. The engineer must prove harmlessness. The investor must wait while the agency decides whether production may proceed. This isn't obviously capitalism. It's a permission-based statism. Now, note the circularity of what follows. And this should make you mad. Regulators made nuclear expensive through pseudoscientific standards. Then critics pointed to those costs and declared nuclear economically unviable. Then regulators cited the lack of new construction as proof that nuclear was not working. They built a trap, pushed the industry into it, and then blamed the industry for being trapped. Think about the American spirit. The Empire State Building was completed in just over a year. Pipelines, railroads, factories, bridges, skyscrapers. America used to build. Not perfectly, not always under a fully free system, but culturally. There was still a presumption that builders had a right to build, and that building was good. The gap between idea and execution was short. Today, you can't build. It takes longer to get permission to build than it once took to build. A lot longer. Now, that's a fundamental change in what America is. Old America, you are free to act. And if you violate somebody's rights, you will be held accountable. Modern America says, you may not act until you prove in advance that nothing bad will ever happen. Now, these are completely radical different systems, a different sense of life, a different mentality, a different way of thinking about the world and thinking about progress. One is a civilization of producers, the other a civilization of permission seekers, of bureaucrats. Nuclear is the clearest victim of that transformation. Now, there's another issue that does not get enough attention that we should talk about, because we're trying to be comprehensive here. And that is the structure of electricity markets. You know, utilities were structured in the 1960s as vertically integrated kind of monopolies. They were granted monopoly power by the government. They had a geographic area, and there was no competition. It was not capitalism. It was a regulated monopoly. Now, that model was bad, but it was compatible with building nuclear power plants. And more compatible than what we have today, which is a fragmented, restructured, re-regulated electricity market. Some people think that what we have today is a deregulated market. No. It's a re-regulated market. A nuclear power plant is a massive, capital-intensive, long-duration asset. You need enormous sums up front. The plant takes years to build. Once it's operating, it can produce huge amounts of electricity for decades. But the payback period can be long. That means the financing structure matters enormously. Under the older vertically integrated utility model, a utility could own generation, transmission, distribution, and retail service. It could plan over decades. It could finance a nuclear plant with the expectation that prudently incurring costs could be recovered through the rate base. Since then, many states have restructured electricity markets. Not deregulated, restructured. Generation was separated from distribution. Merchant generators had to sell into competitive wholesale markets. Future electricity prices became uncertain. Nuclear developers developers now face not only regulatory risk, construction risk, litigation risk, and political risk, but also the merchant power price risk. It's a deadly combination. It's why Vogtle, this latest nuclear power plant, expansion in Georgia matters. Vogtle was expensive, late, and a cautionary tale in many ways, but it was completed. And it was completed in a traditionally regulated utility environment, not a pure merchant market. Now, the lesson here is let's go back to the monopolies model. The lesson is we have to get rid of antitrust and let real markets work. Nuclear requires a financing model that matches the nature of the assets. In a free market, that would mean property rights, long-term contracts, which are made impossible by antitrust and regulations. It means private capital, insurance, voluntary power purchase agreements, the freedom for firms to integrate generation, transmission, distribution, and retail, if that is economically efficient, to structure the industry in ways that make sense, not to the central planner, not to the regulator, but to the market. In today's mixed economy, at a very minimum, we should stop forcing nuclear into market structures that make long-duration capital investment irrational. Regulation make nuclear uniquely risky and expensive. Market restructuring then remove the financial model, the financing model that could absorb that risk. The two problems compound each other. All right, interesting stuff, no? I see Richard is engaged. Where are the rest of you? Richard is doing all the questions. You guys have no questions? Nothing? Everything's clear? You know everything? All right, let's step back a second and let's take a look at China. China's building nuclear power plants. It's actually using an American design, the AP1000. It's a Westinghouse technology. China is demonstrating the exact principle America abandoned, the value of repetition. The first AP1000 projects in China had first-of-a-kind difficulties. Of course they did, right? That is what happens with first-of-a-kind projects. But China kept building. It standardized. It localized the supply chain. It maintained institutional continuity. It repeated the design. This is how learning curves work. You don't become good at building nuclear power plants by issuing white papers. You become good by building nuclear power plants. America, by contrast, built Vogtle 3 and 4 after decades of atrophy. The workplace had to be rebuilt. The supply chains had to be rebuilt. The contractors had to relearn. The regulators had to process a project in an environment that they had not seen in more than a generation. So Vogtle was expensive. But the right conclusion is not AP1000 failed. The right conclusion is this is what happens when you kill an industry and then try to restart it after a generation. The next AP1000s will be cheaper. The next after that chapter still will be still cheaper. But only if we actually build them. The learning curve does not exist in speeches. It exists in concrete, steel, welders, workers, suppliers, project managers, and repetition. Repetition, repetition. Now, right now, there's a real debate going on in America as the Trump administration seems to be more friendly towards nuclear. Should the nuclear future be small, modular reactors, or proven large reactors like the AP1000s? It seems like the answer is, or should be, first, let's experiment. But let's build the AP1000s. We know we can. We know they work. We know they scale. And in parallel, let's build SMRs and experiment and see how they work and where they add value. Small modular reactors are valuable. They're useful for remote communities, military bases, data centers, yeah. Industrial heat, mining sites, small grids. They may eventually benefit from factory production and modular repetition. I can see building a few of them here in Puerto Rico, where you don't want long, electricity wires transmission lines because of hurricanes. You want the power plant to be very close to the consumer. So you build a few of them close to where the population is. But small modular reactors are not magic. A small reactor built once is still first of a kind. It still needs licensing. It still needs fuel. It still needs customers. It still needs financing. It still needs manufacturing capacities. It still needs a learning curve. The first one will be expensive. Second one cheaper, and so on. The danger is that we use SMRs as an excuse, small modular reactors, not to build proven large reactors. We may say, let's wait for the perfect new technology. Let's wait for the next design. Let's wait for the smaller reactors, the cheaper reactor, the more politically acceptable reactor. Let's wait for thorium. Let's wait for thorium reactors. But that's how you never build. Build what you know and experiment on the side. The right approach is to build proven large reactors now, especially standardized designs like the AP1000. This is what China's doing. While allowing SMRs and other tech, hey, maybe we'll have a fusion reactor soon, to develop in parallel, where they have genuine use cases. Don't wait for the perfect reactor. Build a good reactor. Build it again and again and again. It'll get cheaper, more efficient, more productive. Now you might ask, what would a free market regulatory system look like? I mean, nuclear reactors are risky, I guess. How would you regulate them in a pure free market? So first of all, it's not going to look like the modern administrative state at all. In a pure free market, the government does not centrally plan energy. It does not decide which technologies are needed. It does not hand out permission slips for production. The government's job is to protect individual rights. That's it. So the relevant legal questions are these. Have you violated anyone's rights? Have you committed fraud? Have you trespassed on another's property? Have you caused physical harm? Have you created an objective, demonstrable threat of harm? The standard is not, have you satisfied an agency's open-ended preferences? The standard is, have you violated rights? The central principle is the presumption of innocence. A business should be free to act unless the government can prove objective endangerment. The burden of proof belongs to the state or the plaintiff, not the producer. No one should have to prove that nothing bad could ever happen. That's impossible. Under a proper legal system, laws are clear, standards are objective, technical requirements are tied to demonstrable risk, and disputes adjudicated by courts according to evidence. Evidence. Agencies do not possess open-ended discretion to delay, redesign, or veto production. There would be no L&T ALARA style infinite ratchet. Radiation standards would be objective. They would be tied to evidence, thresholds, causality, and actual risk. Once a rational safety threshold is met, the producer proceeds. Safety is a standard, not an infinite process. Private institutions would play a major role. Private certification. Insurance. Insurance would play a huge role. Lenders, investors, customers, engineering firms, and professional liability systems would all matter. A nuclear operator would need to satisfy insurance. Insurers would then get the particular thing certified. It would need to satisfy investors. it would need to satisfy customers. And it would need credible engineering certification to do all of the above. And if it caused real harm, it would be liable. Liability would be full and unlimited. A nuclear operator facing genuine unlimited liability for any harm caused to neighboring communities has every reason to build the safest possible plant, not because a bureaucrat in Washington is reviewing its materials list, but because a catastrophic accident would mean financial ruin. That incentive is real, immediate, and impossible to game. No paperwork theater, no box checking. Actual safety, because it's in their interest, self-interest. Private insurance markets would do the due diligence. For genuinely high-stakes activities, building a nuclear reactor, experimenting with dangerous pathogens, operating a dam above a populated valley, the most powerful accountability mechanism is mandatory private liability insurance. Before any insurer writes a multi-billion-dollar policy on a nuclear plant, it will send its own engineers. It will review the design. It will inspect the construction. It will require ongoing safety monitoring. It will set its own standards. Not because the government told it to, but because it's on the hook if something goes wrong. A private insurer with billions of dollars at risk is a more rigorous safety auditor and more objective one than a government bureaucrat whose job is secure regardless of outcomes, with no upside. Now, I've discussed the insurance mechanism regarding high-risk ventures in other programs, but the principle is this. Instead of government telling you in advance what to do, government requires that you carry sufficient liability insurance, and then the private market, the insurers, does the rigorous safety work that government bureaucrats pretend to do. Now, it might not even need that. That is, insurance, you might not even need the government at all, because you won't be able to raise capital without insurance. The market would take care of it. Insurance bodies would generate their own safety standards. We know this. We've seen it in other industries. Underwriters Laboratories, the organization that certifies electric products, is not a government agency. It grew organically from the insurance industry because insurers needed reliable standards before they would insure electrical equipment. The aviation industry developed its own rigorous standards precisely because aircraft manufacturers, airlines, and insurers all had enormous financial risks and safety outcomes. Nuclear, left to develop in a free market, would have done the same. The industry would have produced its own standards, their own standard bodies, its own inspection regimes, its own certification processes, all tied to actual liability rather than bureaucratic compliance. Property rights would handle most externality concerns. If a nuclear power plant is genuinely contaminating the air, water, or land, like any other industry, those neighbors have a cause of action under property right law. You don't need a preemptive regulatory bureaucracy to handle this. You need courts that enforce property rights rigorously. Radiation that crosses a property line and damages human health is a property rights violation. The threat of that lawsuit is a powerful deterrent. Now, I get that there are extreme tail risk events. A truly catastrophic nuclear accident, the kind that could affect thousands of square miles, Chernobyl, presents challenges the standard liability framework you would need to address carefully. Even in a free market, there's a legitimate role for government to ensure that the liability structure is real, that insurance coverage is adequate, that corporate veil cannot be used to escape responsibility for catastrophic harm. For ventures with catastrophic potential, I've argued that potentially piercing the corporate veil, making shareholders personally liable rather than allowing the corporation to absorb the loss and dissolve, that would keep the incentives alive and would guarantee that the corporation would get insurance. But this is crucial. Only people who can show actual injury, direct risk, property invasion, breach of contract, or demonstrable endangerment should have standing. There should be no activist veto, no national environmentalist lobby should be able to stop a plant merely because it hates nuclear power. The waste issue should be handled the same way. Spent fuel is not a mystical curse. It is physical material. The owner is responsible for storing it safely. It can be stored on site. It can be contracted to specialized storage firms. Dry cask storage can be a legitimate long-term solution. Recycling and processing should be legal if done safely. The government should not trap the industry in a politically blocked repository scheme and then say you can't build because the political problem we created has not been solved. Under free market, utilities could generate, transmit, distribute, and sell electricity if they chose. Customers could sign long-term contracts. Data centers could finance reactors. Industrial firms could own reactors. Investors could finance fleets of standardized plants. No state-granted monopoly would be required. No forced restructuring model would be imposed. The market would discover the right financing structures. The principle is simple. You should be free to act. If you violate rights, you'll be held accountable. But the government may not stop you merely because someone is afraid of what you might do. That's the difference between freedom, a permissionless society, and a society of permission. The nuclear industry today operates under the worst possible combination. Stripped of full liability, thanks to the Price-Anderson cap. That's a legal thing. Buried under pseudoscientific prior restraint regulation, thanks to L&T and ALARA, and unable to standardize or innovate, thanks to case-by-case permitting. It is not capitalism. It's not even sensible mixed economy regulation. It's a system designed, whether intentionally or not, intentionally really, to prevent nuclear power from competing. So what can we do now, even in this mixed economy? We don't live under capitalism. We live in a mixed economy. So what reforms could actually happen, are realistic? Well, I mean, the North Star should be clear. Reduce permission, increase objectivity, limit discretion, restart the learning curve. First, shift the burden of proof. This is the most fundamental reform. Today, the producer must prove harmlessness. That is impossible. The government should have to prove real endangerment. A permit denial should require specific material, scientific, demonstrable risk. Now, this is a long-term reform. It requires deep changes in administrative law and statutory law, but it is the thing to fight for, and it can be done. Second, binding shot clocks. Deadlines must have teeth. Not the agency must explain why it is late. That is meaningless. The real standard should be if the agency misses a deadline, the permit is granted. For nuclear, maybe 30 days is too aggressive. Okay, so, make it a year or 6 months. And, for repeat units, it should be shorter. Certified designs, once they're approved. But the clock, a clock, has to really mean something, has to be used. Third, certification of fleet licensing. This is probably the most important thing that you could do quickly. Certify the reactor design once, then allow it to be built repeatedly. Limit site review to genuine site-specific factors, seismic issues, hydrology, population, transmission, emergency access. Do not let activists relitigate the same design at every site. The FAA does not recertify a plane every time an airline buys one. Nuclear should not be any different. That's really doable. Fourth, abolish or radically revise L&T and ALARA. This is one of the highest leverage reforms. Replace pseudo-threshold fears with objective radiation standards. Regulate actual safety, not infinite mitigation of theoretical risk. And, get rid of all the environmental reviews. If a standardized nuclear design is being built in an existing nuclear site or a retired coal site, a DOE site or a DOD site, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, or an industrial site, we should not redo the entire environmental trial of nuclear power every time. Review real-life specific risks. Do not reopen the moral question of whether nuclear energy should exist. It should. But don't give the environmentalists this tool of constant review and endless lawsuits. And there has to be an end to it. Financing reform. In today's mixed economy, we need to allow financing structures that fit nuclear's capital profile. That means long-term power purchase agreements. It means allowing large customers, data centers, manufacturers, firms to contract directly with nuclear plants. It means allowing state utility models that permit cost recovery for nuclear construction where appropriate. These are regulatory issues, mainly at the state level. The goal is not to subsidize nuclear. The goal is to stop making nuclear unfinanceable. Seventh, occupational licensing reform. A welder, electrician, pipe fitter, or technician should not become legally unqualified by crossing a state line. 50-state reciprocity for relevant skilled trades is obvious. Yeah, I mean, occupational licensing we should get rid of completely. But the idea that every state does it differently is bizarre. It's, again, an easy one. Automatic licensing, credit for veterans. U.S. Navy has an extraordinary pool of nuclear-trained people. Navy nuclear machinists, mates, electricians, electronics technicians, reactor operators. These people have worked in some of the most demanding nuclear environments in the world. They should not have to start over as if they were untrained apprentices. Give them credit. Give them the license. This should be politically easy. It's a pro-veteran, pro-energy, pro-industry, and pro-common sense. Ninth, spend fuel reform. Stop letting waste be used as a political hostage. Recognize dry cask storage as legitimate. Allow private consolidation storage. Allow recycling and reprocessing. And the fantasy that nuclear cannot proceed unless and until politicians solve the Yukon Mountain problem. Can ask me about that if you want. Finally, nuclear innovation zones. It's kind of cool. Use DOE and DOD sites to test and operate advanced reactors under simplified frameworks. Gather real-world operating data. Build prototypes. Restart learning now, even before the entire regulatory system is fixed. Now, all these reforms reinforce one another. And, type certification only matters if you can build the same design repeatedly. You can only build repeatedly if financing works. Financing only works if regulatory uncertainty falls. The learning curve only compounds if L&T and ALARA are not adding costs every unit. Skilled labor only matters if workers can move where the projects are. The solution is not one magic reform. It's to create the condition under which building is possible. Now, all of this not only has a progress growth dimension, it also has a national security dimension. Nuclear energy is strategic infrastructure. It affects grid reliability, industrial capability, naval expertise, uranium supply chains, enrichment, AI infrastructure, defense production, and technological leadership. China is now harvesting the nuclear learning curve America abandoned. That should be humiliating that the fascist communist regime in China is ahead of America. America invented much of this technology. They're building American design. America pioneered commercial nuclear. America had the engineers, the utilities, the industrial base, and the entrepreneurial culture. And then America strangled itself. The answer is not to copy China's authoritarianism. The answer is to rediscover America's own strength. Freedom, production, engineering, capitalism, the right to build. We should build proven large reactors now. We should build AP100s and other certified large designs repeatedly. We should develop SMRs in parallel. We should rebuild the fuel cycle, uranium mining, conversion, enrichment, fuel fabrication, recycling, storage. We should train welders, electricians, engineers, project managers, and quality control specialists. But above all, what we really need is the confidence to do all this, the moral confidence. We don't just need nuclear engineers. We need a culture that honors engineers, honors progress, honors industrialization. We do not merely need better licensing timelines. We need a civilization that understands production as noble. What's going on right now? Well, it would be great to abolish LNT and ALARA. Now, it's a prerequisite for really everything else. As long as these two pseudoscientific standards govern NRC, nuclear will remain impossibly expensive to license and build regardless of any other reforms. There's been real movement. Trump's executive order instructs the NRC to reevaluate both. The Department of Energy has already removed ALARA from its own directives. The NRC is now actively considering a parallel rulemaking. Epstein's timeline is precise. Within 3 months, the NRC issues a request for a fast-track national academics review of LNT's scientific basis. Within 18 months, based on that review, the NRC publishes proposed rules stripping both LNT and ALARA from its regulations. A final rule could be enforced by early 2027, right before the first SMR, small modular reactor, operating licenses are expected. If the science-based threshold is in place before this first SMRs are licensed, developers can design to that standard from the start, saving tens of millions of dollars per unit. The replacement standard Epstein recommends is simple: a single public dose threshold of 5 rem per year, the same limit already applied to nuclear workers who have a long track record of safe operation at that level. And by the way, I think that's a standard for, nuclear weapons in submarines, right? Second, use the General Environmental Impact Statement by default. The ADVANCE Act, passed bipartisanly in 2024, rightly directed the NRC to move towards general EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, a single environmental review for a standardized reactor design that applies to all copies of that design. This is a standardized principle France understood 50 years ago, and we abandoned. The NRC should promulgate a rulemaking general EIS, the default for standardized SMR designs, eliminate the duplicative years-long review for every copy of a proven design, and produce the first such generalized EIS within a year. These are all reforms that are being advocated now and could happen. Third, reform the liability structure. The Price-Anderson Act, which caps nuclear liability while simultaneously burdening the industry with prior restraint regulation, should be reconsidered. The liability cap should be raised substantially or eliminated, ideally eliminated, for large reactors, while simultaneously removing the pseudoscience prior restraint regulation. You cannot have it both ways. Either the industry carries genuine unlimited liability and self-regulates through that incentive, or it operates under genuine prior restraint regulation set to science-based standards. What we have now, neutered liability and pseudoscientific regulation, gives us the worst of both worlds. Reform should move towards full liability, mandatory private insurance at levels that reflect real catastrophic risk, and the gradual replacement of prior restraint bureaucracy with liability-based accountability. Fourth, last one, make the regulatory reform durable. This is important. Trump's support for nuclear is essentially meaningless unless it produces structural change that survives beyond this administration. Nuclear construction timelines run 8 to 15 years. No investor can underwrite that timeline when regulatory ground can shift every election cycle. That means statutory reform. I keep saying this. Not executive orders, not NRC guidance documents, but changes embedded in law. The ADVANCE Act is a start. It's not enough. Congress needs to codify the abolition of LNT and ALARA in statute, standardize the permitting process, for proven designs in statute and create a regulatory framework that investors can rely on across administrations. They need to do it in statute. Nuclear energy is not just another energy source. It's become a symbol. It's a symbol of the human mind applied to nature, a symbol of abundance, a symbol of civilization that refuses to live by candlelight when it can command the atom. America did not lose nuclear because nuclear failed. We lost nuclear because we replaced confidence with fear, production with permission, science with pseudoscience, rights with regulation. We turned the builders into a suspect. We turned the engineer into a defendant. We turned energy into a sin. The future of nuclear depends on whether we reverse that. Do we restore the presumption of innocence? Do we restore objective law? Do we restore the right to build? Do we build the same reactor again and again and again until we become great at building again? The issue is not whether nuclear can work. We know it works. The issue is whether America still believes in human achievement, still believes in building. A pro-human civilization does not apologize for energy. It builds, builds, builds more of it. All right, that is my spiel on nuclear energy. Again, thanks to Richard for sponsoring this. You can sponsor a show on a topic you want. It's $1,000. Just drop me an email and we can do it. Richard, I hope this covered the bases. I think I covered everything you asked. But I'm happy to take questions. And I think we'll turn to that. We'll turn to our Super Chat questions at this point and see where that takes you. I'll remind you that Alex Epstein is a sponsor of the Yaron Brook Show, a monthly sponsor. And you can check out his work at alexepstein.substack.com, alexepstein.substack.com. And you can get access to Alex AI, where you can ask questions about nuclear energy, other forms of energy, environmentalism, regulations, and you will get amazing responses. Amazing responses. So, Alex AI. Whew, all right. Let's see. We're finishing up our second hour. We have raised more than for 2 hours. So we're, in terms of fundraising, we're into the third hour, and that's great. Keep it coming. We've got about another 120 to complete the third hour goal. I hope we can make that. That would be great. Let's start with the $50 questions. We'll start with Richard. Richard, who sponsored this, so we should start with him. Richard said, loving the nuclear focus. 1 point, SMRs are getting all the attention, but we need large reactors too, including Mitsubishi's APWR 1.7 gigawatt each. Fastest route is a Comanche Peak. Wrote it up. Would love to get it to you and Alex. Yeah, send it. Send it. I emailed Alex and asked him if he'd be interested. If you send me the actual document, I'll just forward it to him, and hopefully he'll read it. But yes, I'm not familiar with all the different production lines or designs of nuclear power plants. I'm sure the Chinese are not only building the AP1000, they're building various types, but they're building many of each so they get the economies of scale going. Other places, I know Scandinavia, they're building nuclear power plants. India is considering nuclear power plants. And yes, bring on more designs. One of the things that will happen, if America really committed to building large nuclear power plants, you would get competitive pressures to innovate and design. You would get more people designing, more options in terms of design, more possibilities, more price points, more safety points. Competition, it's a good thing. And right now, why go into nuclear power? Why go into nuclear energy? Why design a new nuclear power plant when the biggest market in the world, the United States, is not building any? You can design for the Chinese market, but that's limited. Imagine if the United States joined and how much energy that would produce in terms of people eager to create new designs for new power plants. So yes, SMRs get all the SMRs are the sexy thing, but the reality is big nuclear power plants are what we really need, because we need lots of electricity. Imagine we all driving electric cars, or we're not driving cars. We're all being driven by electric cars, taxis and self-driving cars that we own. But those are all going to be electric, and that's the future. Imagine the trucks all being driven by self-driving electric trucks. That requires lots of electricity, much more than we have today. And of course, AI. And as we get richer, we'll discover more and more and more and more things we want to use electricity for. So we need much, much more electricity. There's an infinite demand, potentially infinite demand for the amount of electricity. So the best way to supply that is with large nuclear power plants. And SMRs too, where they're appropriate, like attach one to every data center, or to every Waymo. I don't know, if it's possible one day to build nuclear power plants that are small enough and safe enough to just attach them to an electric motor. Richard says, the corollary to individual rights is we must abolish the permission slip society. Absolutely. Reading NRC documents is stupid beyond anything I've ever read. And I read SEC risk factors at work. They hate nuclear because it solves the problem they need to have. Yes. And their jobs depend on complexity. And their jobs depend on bureaucracy. And their jobs depend on a society built on permission. A society of rights is a permissionless society. It's a society where people don't ask for permission. It's a society where people just build. And if something they're doing is really, really risky, people can complain about that and inspectors could be sent. But it has to be an objective risk. And if people do harm, they are liable for that harm. All right, Richard again. A common talking point from NRC apologists: the reason for regulatory delays is because utilities reactors designers change their design midstream, which requires new analysis. The reality is those redesigns are forced upon them by the NRC's RAIs. RAI stands for, I don't know. My guess is revised regulatory regimes, revised regulations, revised standards that constantly require new redesign of the power plant itself. Yes, I mean, you're at the beck and call of regulators. You're at the beck and call of, remember, regulators have no interest in taking risk. Risk is foreign to them. They're not interested in risk. Industry, private sector weighs risk and return. It doesn't zero out risk, because zero out risk means not building, not creating, not making. Thank you, Richard. All right, Molten Splendor, another $50. Anyone can drive a car anywhere. Why do we allow people to drive a car laissez-faire with only a few rules of the road? Well, quite a few. Do we impose regulations and controls on business, nuclear, science, etc., because we are fearful of things we don't understand or have? I mean, part of it is that we don't understand it. Part of it is that if we regulate nuclear, we piss off fewer people. Like the nuclear industry is upset. But think about if you really regulate automobiles and you made it impossible for people to drive very far, people would get really upset. And we're talking about hundreds, tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. Everybody has a car. So we're not going to piss them off too much. We're still going to regulate certain things. We're going to make cars more expensive, but slowly. We're going to have speed limits. But once people get upset about a 55 mile an hour speed limit, we'll raise it. So it's a sheer numbers game. You don't want to piss off the large majority of people. So it's not just what we don't understand. It's also, from a political perspective, where we're going to do the least damage politically. Okay. But a lot of it is fear of science, right? I mean, scientists understand nuclear power plants. They know how they work. They understand it completely. It's the layman and the politician who don't, and the regulator. And they play off of that. Remember, it's also a way to control. Indirectly control all of us. Thanks, Moulton. All right, we still have about $120 to reach our goal. So consider doing a sticker. Stickers are great. Value for value. Rand says, hi, Yaron. Great to see you covering nuclear. Thanks to Richard. With new reactors needing fuel, does Australia have a major uranium export opportunity? If we get our act together, and how do we convince Australians to back nuclear and lift the ban? Yeah, I mean, same thing we have to do to convince Americans. It's the safest, cleanest, most powerful, potentially, form of production of electricity that there is available out there. You don't get the unreliability of solar and wind, and you don't get real pollution. So you have to fight for a permissionless, growth-oriented world, and so you fight for it the same in Australia as you would in America. Yes, I think countries like Australia that have a lot of uranium and have vast territory and could build uranium processing facilities can be a crucial and important player in a future supply chain that provides uranium to the United States and to China and to other countries around the world that are pursuing nuclear. It has to come from somewhere. Now, a lot can be done in the United States. The United States has uranium deposits here, but we have to deregulate mining. We have to make mining a lot easier and cheaper. I mean, that's a whole other show, is to talk about mining regulations and how we can get mining accelerated and working faster, because that solves our rare earth material problem. It solves our battery problem. It solves our uranium problem. I mean, mining is really key to this. And the thing restricting mining today is not that we don't have the material in the ground. It exists in the ground in America. It's all the environmental regulation that makes it impossible to mine it. And then even if you mine it, the environmental regulations make it almost impossible to refine it, to build factories that refine this stuff. So we got to massively reform the environmental regulations in this country. Get rid of them, ideally, but reform them to make mining and refining possible. All right, let's see. I'm looking for nuclear questions first, and then I'll get to the other ones. All right, Richard. These are $20 questions. France can and should be doing better on nuclear, absolutely. But one of the reasons France isn't a complete basket case and has more industry than more free market EU countries like Germany is basically its energy abundance. Yes, and its energy abundance there's a sense in which it's an accident. It was the technocrats, the bureaucratic technocrats who ran kind of the energy regulatory infrastructure in France, believed in nuclear. They happen to believe in nuclear. And they didn't buy into the fear-mongering. And they doubled down on nuclear in the 70s, and they built out nuclear during that period of time. And since everything was centralized in government, you got, by chance, a group of pro-technology bureaucrats who then, and they didn't let the environmentalists get to them. And since they ran things, this is one thing you can do with authoritarianism. If, this is why China's building nuclear power plants. The people in China have decided nuclear is good. They just command that they all be built. Now, this is not a case for authoritarians. It's the opposite. It's kind of shocking that you can find authoritarians who get it, and we in free countries are holding ourselves back. It's pretty stunning. It's pretty stunning, but so yes, France should be way ahead. If it had a true free market with the same pro-science mentality, they would be way ahead. Instead of 70% of the energy, they could be producing 150% of their energy and selling their excess to Germany, to Spain, to these other countries. So France could be, instead of 70%, could be over 100% and using it as a profit center, which is what it should be. Richard continues, not to mention that they have mandatory contested hearings, allowing the NRDC and other anti-life environmentalists to engage in endless delay via litigation and mandatory uncontested hearings, even if no one sues. Yes, I mean, environmental impact studies and all the environmental regulations and hearings, and that is killing building everywhere. It's killing residential and industry and factories and mining and building of nuclear, and in every dimension of American life, these environmental regulations are shackling progress, are inhibiting progress. It's one of the most important things that can be eliminated from our regulatory books. And the reality is that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, right now, under Trump's, is pretty good on this. They would like to get rid of a lot of these environmental regulations. They're trying. But as I pointed out before, to really have a difference over the long run, you got to get it through you got to get it through the legislature. You got to get a bill that basically deregulates, gets rid of all these regulations at a statutory level, not just at the level of regulations that can then be overturned by the next administration. Okay, Richard. One point I found interesting in Modus Engwin's Shorting the Grid: deregulated merchant markets on average have twice the regulations that regulated utility markets do. Yes. I mean, I always am shocked by people talking about the deregulation of, the what was it, the 1980s or 1990s in utility markets. It wasn't. It was a re-regulation. It was just a change of regulation. And in some cases, it involved adding regulation and adding complexity and adding processes that make things worse, not better. That was true of the deregulation of telecommunications, which was a little bit better. It moved towards more freedom, but still massive regulations, just different ones. So it's always re-regulation, not true deregulation. All right, Rand came back with another 50 Australian dollars. If there would be a near total deregulation of nuclear as proposed, what effects would this have on nuclear submarine production and hence AUKUS, which is the military deal between the US, Australia, and the UK to supply Australia with nuclear submarines? Look, I think that a complete deregulation would create massive competition, would generate real innovation in nuclear production. That would spill over into military nuclear power plants and would ultimately improve the power plants that go into the nuclear submarines. Those have to be small, incredibly safe and efficient. And I think that if you had real competition in the civilian sector, that would spill over into significant improvements in the military sector as well. So a huge impact in terms of just better. All right, Stringer Bell. Hello, Yaron. Is the fear surrounding nuclear energy a result of the Manhattan Project? No. It's a result of anything of 3 Mile Island, a problem that was actually dealt with and nobody died. It's a result of Chernobyl, which was a meltdown, but of a Soviet reactor, built by Soviet system, and the response to it was Soviet-like. If you want to see a great TV show, check out Chernobyl on HBO. I think it's on HBO Max, where they dramatize the response to the Chernobyl meltdown, and you can see how the meltdown had the impact that it had because of the complete and utter incompetence of the communist operatives, we'll call them. Adam says, France has two separate tertiary educational systems, universities versus original private grandes écoles. Working experts come from the grandes écoles and ignore university philosophers. Is that what makes us different? I don't really think so. I think what makes it different is very much a top-down, bureaucratically led decision-making process. They know the environmentalist groups don't get a lot of say. The bureaucrats do, and if the bureaucrats happen to be good in science, then they get it and they fund it and they do it. In France, the smartest people who graduate from university or their écoles go to the bureaucracy. They don't go into private industry. So the people working in the French government are, relatively speaking, relative to bureaucrats everywhere else in the world, smart and competent. They're not hardworking, but they're smart and competent. So the bureaucracy works better there. So in spite of the massive bureaucracy in France and really horrible economic policy, France somehow manages. It doesn't do well. The United States is way ahead of France in every dimension of economic success. But France survives because it has relatively smart people who go into government and make it work to the best that government can work, which is not very good, but better than the incompetence that we tend to hire into our government. Mary Eileen, are there any hopeful signs on the nuclear front? Are there any politicians who understand the value of nuclear power and fighting for it? Yes, I think the Trump administration, broadly speaking, is very pro-nuclear. I think Energy Secretary Wright, Chris Wright, is very pro-nuclear, as is the head of the EPA, Zedlin, something like that. Former congressman is very pro-nuclear and trying to deregulate at the environmental level to allow for more nuclear. I think the Interior Secretary, the former governor of North Dakota, is pretty pro-nuclear. So I think that people within the Trump administration, and here, I mean, the good news is is that Alex is really having an impact. I think Alex has really significantly had an impact on the way people think about nuclear. So congratulations to Alex, and I think he has real influence among certain people within the Trump administration, particularly those people involved in energy, like Secretary Wright and people involved in environmental regulation. Richard, how did France keep from losing its nerve and build out the nuclear infrastructure? I mean, basically, it was. Again, it was because it's centrally commanded, the people at the center of it, the bureaucrats in charge, looked at the science and stuck with it, and they didn't panic over the environmental stuff, they took as when global warming, the whole hysteria over CO2 happened. That reinforced their decision around nuclear because they were the lowest permitted, lowest emission CO2 country in the EU, and that caused them to. It reinforced their commitment to nuclear. Liam, is Alex still influential in Trump inner circles? I mean, he's influential among some people in the Trump administration. I wouldn't say inner circles, but certainly among the people responsible for energy policy. Yes, I think he's quite influential there. Normative Randroid, have there been any advances regarding nuclear waste or recycling waste materials? Yes, they have been. There are a number of nuclear power plants, small nuclear power plants, the small reactors, that are built to use used materials, waste materials. So they take the waste materials and they turn them into energy. I think there's advancements in storage. But yes, there's constant work on that. The French are very good at recycling waste materials. That's why there's no big storage conflict in France. Their power plants are very good at recycling. So yes, the technology keeps getting better about how to deal with it. All right, let's see. All right, let's take your more general questions now. Thank you again, Richard, for doing the nuclear. I think that took up all the nuclear power questions. Just to remind you, 3 $20 questions, and we make our third hour goal. We're well into the third hour, so it would be appropriate. 150 would get us to within $10, so please consider doing that. Stickers, a bunch of stickers, like $5, $10, $2, $3 stickers would really help us get to the goal. Let me just thank some of the sticker people before we continue with the questions. I'll thank Jeremy and Esiv, $50. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Esiv, $50 sticker. And Jason Adams. And let's see. Who else do we have here? We have CP Milken, Jonathan Honing, Stephen Hopper, and we have Thomas, and we have Mary Aline and Stephen. Yep, thank you guys. Really appreciate all the stickers. There's still 100 people watching. There's still a bunch of you who haven't done a sticker. So just do something at whatever level. We should be able to chip away at the $61 and get it down to zero here pretty quickly. All right, Jeffrey. Hey, Jeffrey. I'll see you in a few days, Thursday. Yeah. So send me any details I need for the restaurant, when and where we're meeting exactly. All right, Jeffrey says, do you think Lillian Rearden would have been written differently after the sexual revolution? Did Rand write much about it, the sexual revolution? She didn't really. I mean, I think she was forward in a sense, but she thought it also became overly promiscuous. I mean, she wrote obviously about the promiscuity of the new left and the kind of the Woodstock generation. I don't know, but I don't think she wrote much about the sexual revolution. I wish she had. And in terms of Lillian, would she have written her differently? I don't think so. I mean, I think that issue around sex that Rearden represents and that Lillian exploits still happens, even post-sexual revolution. Less, but I think still happens. It's still out there. But, I don't know. I mean, she quite possibly would have given new information, new attitudes. Maybe she would have dealt with with sex differently in Atlas Shrugged, or with Lillian differently in Atlas Shrugged. I just don't know. She was a genius. I'm not. James, has the American sense of life done a good job of stopping Trumpism? No. I mean, the reality is that Trumpism is going strong, and Trump got elected. That is not a good sign for the American sense of life. And Congress is impotent in the face of so at the edges when it goes overboard, like with ICE and and with but what else? The court system is what has really stood up to Trump, and we talked about that on a previous show. The court system, our Constitution, is what's held him back, not the American sense of life, sadly. Whoops, I did that accidentally. All right, James, is there evidence the Supreme Court throwing out most of the tariffs has helped the economy and boosted the stock market? Not really, because they threw it out and then Trump imposed new ones. And then now those new ones are being ruled illegal, and Trump is threatening other ones. So tariffs are still, I mean, they're less of a drag on the economy because they're being refunded. And so some companies are benefiting from that, which could be helping the stock market. But they're still holding the market back is the uncertainty about where the whole tariff goes. I do think the market is more optimistic about the court's willingness to throw out Trump tariffs over and over and over again. And that might be helping boost some stock prices. Not your average algorithm. Do collectivistic systems ultimately get reversed because they don't want to live like cockroaches? Intellectuals can't stop people from finding ways out. Well, I mean, yeah, but it could take a very long time. And people have to have the idea of individualism and have to be willing to fight for it. I mean, look at Iran. 47 years later, it's still an authoritarian place. A majority of people would like it to change, and yet they don't have the power to change it. Look at how long the Soviet Union existed. Look at authoritarian China. So I don't know. It can take a long time. And it's hard to leave, particularly when countries like America won't accept you as an immigrant. Not your average algorithm. Did Hitler even go to college? Where did he absorb all the Kantian philosophy? Well, remember, you don't absorb Kantian philosophy from college. You absorb Kantian philosophy from the culture. Kantian philosophy by that time was in the culture over 100 years. It had infiltrated into every aspect of the culture, the art, the intellectuals, the schools from grade pre-K to all the way. And it doesn't necessarily manifest core philosophy. It manifests in people's attitudes towards things, even if they don't know the philosophical roots. You don't have to study Kant to be influenced by his philosophy. Now, if you want to see the process by which this happens, and which it happened in Nazi Germany, read Ominous Parallels, Leonard Peikoff's Ominous Parallels. It's not that all the Germans read Kant. It's that Kant was part of an educational system. I mean, how many Christians read the Bible? Very few. But it's part of how they live because it's inculcated in them. How many people have really thought about altruism and studied altruism and maybe even read Auguste Comte, the guy who came up with the idea of altruism and named it altruism? The idea of altruism comes from Jesus, but the idea of the naming of altruism. How many people have read the Sermon on the Mount and understood it? Very few. And yet altruism is everywhere because it doesn't take a lot of people to read it. It just takes it to become, because of the intellectuals are part of the culture, part of the every educational experience from parenting to school that people have. Normative Android, thank you for the $10. Really, really appreciate that. We're down to $33 to make it to our goal, $33. A few stickers, even small ones, will get us there. Oh, Rand just got us there with his 50 Australian dollars. Rand says, thorium wasn't mentioned in your section on nuclear. How viable do you think thorium is as a fuel source? And is this the next step in the energy density journey? I don't know. That's why it wasn't mentioned. I know that there are plans for thorium plants potentially in Scandinavia. But, this is where you need the marketplace to determine, right? People need to build the plants, and there needs to be competition. And I don't know everything that goes into it. The costs. Supposedly it's completely recyclable. There's not a lot of risks. I mean, it sounds perfect. But why haven't they been built? Why haven't they even been built? Why aren't the Chinese building them? So, and thorium is available in Scandinavia. I think it can be mined there. So let's see what the market determines. I don't have a scientific view of any of these things. I don't even have a scientific view that says, yeah, we should have nuclear. Nuclear works. I just want all the barriers to be eliminated and let the market happen. Maybe it turns out natural gas is so cheap right now that nuclear doesn't start up really again for another 10 years. I don't think that's true, but maybe. My point is not this is what we need, and we need this particular type of nuclear and this particular type of material, uranium or thorium or something else. My point is we need freedom. And when we have freedom, you know, beautiful things will happen. If we deregulate nuclear, then nuclear becomes competitive. And then we'll see in the competition who wins and which design wins and which material wins. And SMRs or big nuclear power plants and big nuclear power plants, or the uranium or the thorium. Is there a chance for fusion? I mean, a million different options. But that's the beauty of competition. That's the beauty of freedom. Wes, thank you. Thank you for the sticker. Really appreciate that. We have met our goals and a little bit more than that. So I appreciate everybody's support today. Thank you. First of all, Richard, and then everybody else who stepped in. In summer, late to the show, Canada is looking to build multiple reactors at multiple sites. Good for Canada. Province of Alberta is looking to join the Nuclear Energy Protection Front. Worth paying attention to. Unfortunately, trend is government-driven. Yeah, in Canada, it's going to be government-driven, but it's better than the alternative of not doing any nuclear. So, good. And let's hope there's a rational, relatively rational regulatory regime over there, and that the government's push will actually generate ultimately a marketplace, a market for nuclear. All right, Kim says, love the Frankfurt segment with Nikos. Very interesting topic. Great. I mean, we're going to be doing a lot more of these, so stay tuned. MP creates, love the human achievement segment in these shows. Consider moving it to the front to begin with something positive. Interesting. Begin with something positive or end with something positive? Hard to tell. Kim, is generational trauma a legitimate concept, or is it just something determinists believe? I think it can be a legitimate concept. I think COVID was a generational trauma. It was a trauma that all children, all young people experienced, college age and under. I mean, all of us experienced it in some sense, but certainly younger generation experienced more harshly. I think 9/11 was a generational trauma, and I think the financial crisis was. We've had 3 in 26 years, which is a lot, and it explains some of the attitudes that people have today and some of the misery and alienation and depression that people have. So I think it's a real thing. It's not deterministic. It's just a fact of, wow, this horrible thing happened. How do I deal with it? And it happened to all of us. So I think a lot of people are affected by it. And one of the things that turns it into a trauma is when our government and our intellectuals deal with it wrongly and badly. And that's true of COVID, it's true of the financial crisis, and it's true of 9/11. Our politicians and our intellectuals screwed it up and created a trauma. It didn't have to be. All right, MP creates, peak capitalism is when an online search engine company is so profitable they can eliminate mosquitoes as a side project. Human achievement, yes. I wouldn't call it peak capitalism because we don't have capitalism and we're far from peak, but it's cool. It's one of the cool aspects of capitalism. Baker, Yaron, could you get Harry Ben-Sawing on to discuss philosophical problems with preventive law regulations? He has some great things to say. Yes, he does. And I'll have him on sometime. And if I don't bring that up, then certainly come on the Super Chat and ask that question, and we'll get him to talk about it. That's the beauty of the Super Chat. And Soma, a friendly reminder that it is easier for Iran to enrich weapon-grade uranium than it is for peaceful European countries to enrich for domestic energy. Yeah, absolutely. And because they've invested in it. They've invested in it. Fantastic. Thank you again, Richard. Thank you to all of you. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you got something out of it, out of the nuclear energy show. I will see you all tomorrow. There won't be a lot of shows this week. I am traveling Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I'm not sure if I'll do any shows during that period. I'm kind of on vacation. But there will be a show tomorrow, so don't miss the show tomorrow. Thank you to all of you, and I will see you up. One more. Yaron, your scripted sections have a very AI-generated feel to them, do they? What was scripted? What was AI? So yeah, I mean, I definitely use AI for research and for, certain parts of it, but this is not, what I do is not fully scripted. Thank you, WCZN. All right, guys. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.